The next theme we have is leveraging technology for humanitarian action, balancing innovation with ethical responsibility. Now let's call in the moderator and the speakers. So the moderator for this time is going to be Chiara Lepora. And Chiara, she had a very nice speech in the morning. Thank you very much for coming out again. Chiara is an emergency medicine specialist who has worked in the MSF and the Red Cross, and she teaches global health at the University of Denver. Thank you very much for joining us. And the speaker we have today, we have two speakers. First, Sebastien Guillemot. Sebastien is the co-founder and CTO of dcSpark, specializing in blockchain innovations, and co-founder of Paima Studios. And he has lived in Japan for 6 years, working in the Web3 space. Thank you very much for joining. And lastly, we have Shoko Hanzawa. Shoko, the Japan representative of the International Committee of the Red Cross, ICRC, since 2023, has over 10 years of humanitarian aid experience. She holds a master's degree from Columbia University and will discuss the role of technology in humanitarian aid. Thank you very much. よろしくお願いいたします. Okay, Chiara, would you like to take over?
Thank you very much, Christelle, and thank you to both of you for being here. I would really like to keep this as an open conversation, because often people who are very knowledgeable of new technologies and decentralized system, for instance, are not that used to talking about humanitarian, and vice versa. So we are going to start by, on the contrary, pointing out how many overlaps and how many converging aspects there are between these two fields. And maybe let's just start by having both of you introducing the company you work with and the work that you do, and then we will go into a conversation on specific aspects. Sebastien?
Yeah, I'm the founder of two separate companies. One of them is called dcSpark, which is a company building core R&D for blockchain protocols, primarily focusing on layer 2 networks and ZK. As well, I'm the founder of Paima Studios, which is focusing more on the application side, to try to create real applications for end users using this cutting edge technology that we help build.
All right, so I work with the International Committee of the Red Cross. It's called ICRC. And basically, we are a humanitarian organization providing assistance and protection to the people affected by armed conflict.
Thanks a lot. And just to make sure we're all situated in the same understanding, I think we heard by the previous panel, for instance, a lot of good news about the way in which different parts of the world are improving and how new technologies can actually help and make the difference in decreasing inequities, for instance. On the aspect of conflict, however, the world is not doing much better. The number of conflict has been increasing lately, and the number of people affected by conflict, either death or displacement, is unfortunately still increasing today. So we are talking about a type of situation that is not yet being resolved, and unfortunately, I think the ICRC is in the front line of many of these situations. Can we maybe then start, Shoko-san, by telling us how do you or does the ICRC see the role of emerging and decentralized technologies in the humanitarian work that you do?
I think it's really indicative of what I'm having right now. I have a paper, which is a cheat sheet, and then the pen. And then Sebastien here, I mean, he doesn't have anything. And I mean, this is really indicative. I mean, I'm a humanitarian worker, and maybe from technological point of view, you might think that we are living in a different kind of world or even the age. So that's how I want to start. But it doesn't mean that we do not embrace technologies, emerging technologies, but we take a very cautious approach. And just please let me explain that. Because, so we have a mandate entrusted to us by the state, and we basically really strive to assist and provide protection for the most vulnerable people, prisoners of war, children, separated families, etc., etc., etc. And we have to do it under do no harm principle. So we basically try to minimize harm in all of our actions and activities. And also, as you can probably imagine, I said that the ICRC works in an armed conflict situation. So basically, we often work in a very, very complex environment. And with very limited services. So oftentimes we don't have electricity, we don't have connectivity, no internet. I mean, that's where we work. And in order to work, we basically rely on our principles of humanity, impartiality, independence, and neutrality. And also we rely on our working modality of having confidential dialogue, bilateral confidential dialogue. So taking all these things into consideration, we must be very cautious. So before adapting new technology, we try to really understand it first, do research, test, and then contextualize it. So meaning that maybe it works in Ukraine, it doesn't work in Sudan, for example. And so this is not very move fast and break things. I mean, this is probably the opposite of that. So, but we see some potential for these technologies, especially AI. And I just want to give you an example. So for example, we try to test the use of AI to improve our supply chain. And so basically what it is that researchers analyze historical data from our health program to identify consumption patterns, and AI is used to create predictive models for more accurate forecasts, which will be extremely useful to us. I mean, it's not easy to predict because, I mean, conflict takes place in a very unexpected time, but at the same time, we are trying to use the new technology to improve our service. And another example is our Luxembourg delegation. So we have a delegation in Tokyo, we have a Tokyo delegation. In Luxembourg, we have a delegation, and it solely focused on the cyberspace. So what they all do is all about cyberspace, how to use cyber technologies and all that. So these are the examples that I can give to you. Maybe from tech people, it might not be anything, but at the same time, it's something for us.
No, thank you, Shoko-san. Very interesting. And Sebastien, you come from the different background, let's say. How did you get involved in applying new technologies to the humanitarian world? And how do you see the role of these new technologies in the future of humanitarian intervention?
Yeah, I think for humanitarian causes, one of the most important things is efficiency. We want the best efficiency possible, not just to get the best help to the people as quickly as we can, but also it helps a lot from a donation perspective, right? People want to donate to a cause where they feel like their money is getting put to good use, and so people want this kind of efficiency. And one of the problems is, of course, how do you measure the efficiency when it's projects on such a large scope, especially in regions where tracking some of these things is pretty difficult. And one of the problems that people have, one of the solutions people have often brought up as a possibility is blockchain. So blockchain gives you a public ledger, you can track public information, so it gives you a way to easily have the auditability that a project might want to make sure that they're operating correctly and that the donors know they're operating correctly. Now, the problem is that these systems are too public, right? Especially when you're working in these kinds of scenarios, you might have some cases where the donor does not necessarily want their information publicly known. They might not want people to know they're donating to a specific cause, right? Similarly, as a recipient, you might not necessarily want people to know you are a recipient. You may be part of an ethnic minority where you is maybe not a visible minority. You don't want people to know you're part of this group or affected by a specific issue, right? And so the blockchain solutions have been kind of too public for a lot of these use cases to onboard. However, there's been a lot of recent innovations in these kinds of private computations that are publicly verifiable. You might have heard this under the term ZK, which stands for Zero Knowledge Cryptography, and it's been a very fast-growing field inside not just the blockchain space, but in computer science in general. And so from our perspective, we at dcSpark and Paima Studios are super interested in technology and trying to bring this technology to better the world. And so we've been focusing on this in a lot of commercial settings to try and build the infrastructure and not just build infrastructure and leave it at that, but build this infrastructure and find real commercial applications or real world use cases for this infrastructure and work with different companies to bring this to end users.
Excellent. That's very, very interesting. Now, of course, you mentioned it at the start. Maybe we can explore very, from both different perspectives, the aspects of ethical considerations in this type of application in the humanitarian context. There are even words that would be equally used and equally important in the technology world and in the humanitarian world, but mean fundamentally different things, or we use them in different ways. Security is a perfect word for that, for instance. The way in which ICRC works on security comes from a very different perspective. But we can say the same for aspects like consent, for instance, or privacy in general. Can you maybe share with us, both of you, where do you think the main attention should be put on ethical consideration in the use and the development of new technologies in humanitarian context? You start.
So I think we have to be really clear about our considerations and find the right balance between different trade-offs. So do we prioritize accessibility over maybe security, or do we prioritize privacy over price considerations, for example? So there are different things that you have to really consider. And then again, I said it in the previous interaction, but we really explore and then engage and we test. And then we make decisions. And if it does not match, and so what we try to use, it does not really match with what we really need or what we really want, then we give up, basically. And so the good example of that is our use of biometric data at the ICRC. So basically what happened is that we tested the biometric data, we researched, and we tried to work with our interlocutors to find the optimum solution using the biometric data. However, so in the course of that, we found out that the risks actually outweighed the benefits of using the biometric data. Because, I mean, if you think about it, I just said that we are working for the most vulnerable population. And then if the data of that person falls into the hands of the wrong people, then we are really in a serious situation. So we consider it actually a security issue for the people we try to serve. And it's totally do harm rather than, do benefit. So now we, as an institution, we have a very strong policy about the use of biometric data at the ICRC. And this kind of translates into who we prefer to work. I mean, I think it naturally does. And we tend to work more with academic institutions because we feel that they have a little more transparency, they are independent from various factors. And so we feel that by working with academic institutions, it ensures sort of ethical decision making. So that's.
Yeah, I mean, for us, like for concrete use cases, we're looking a lot into stuff like traceability, right? So if you're thinking about traceability from a humanitarian perspective, you want that the companies providing the goods, that's making the donations, can have some kind of guarantee that the things they put in are really making it into the system and getting to the end users. From an end user perspective, you want to be able to receive the donations, but do it in a way that preserves your privacy while also avoiding the ability to double dip and apply for the same kind of grants multiple times. And so I think these kinds of technological solutions that we're working on, that people in the zero-knowledge cryptography space in general are working on, can help tackle a lot of these problems that we've had, where people want to, for example, try and introduce technology to solve some of these common problems, but where these technologies introduces too much data. And in a lot of use cases, as was mentioned, data is actually a liability. And you want to try and minimize the data that you own, and zero knowledge is very well positioned as a technology to help solve exactly this problem.
Yeah, that's very interesting and important. Maybe there is also one of the aspects for which, of course, dealing with such ethical conundrum in such complicated situation sometimes pushes us to look for meaningful collaboration, right? And the participation, so the use of decentralization, not only from the technological point of view, but also as a solution to some of the difficult questions that we are confronted with. And so the whole aspect of collaboration, either with the communities that the ICRC serve, or with the policymakers, or with academic institution, or private startup, for instance, all these aspects of collaboration and can really somewhat ensure the fact that the process of innovation is meaningful and ethical as much as possible. Can you maybe share examples in your experience of how collaboration and collaborative innovation can have best practices, if you have any example in mind?
So, I mean, I said that as the ICRC, we work more closely with the academic institutions, but I'm not saying that we don't work with the private sector, that we don't work with startups. I think us being here in Japan, I mean, of course, we do a lot of fundraising and I mean, the conversations with the authorities. But I mean, one of the benefits of us being in Japan is exactly that. I mean, the technological aspect of it, and we are acutely aware of it. And for example, I mean, it's not a startup, but we are exploring how we can actually work, for example, with NEC in Japan. And it's in the area of landmine detection, actually. So I mean, how together with the private sector, we can try to find solutions to the humanitarian challenges that we face on our daily lives. So that's, I mean, how we see the collaboration aspect of it too. I will give you some examples. For example, we have an app called Red Safe app. And it is an app and you can download it, but it's a platform with some functions. For example, it has a digital vault where people can save their important identification documents, for example. It has a way to tell people where one can find humanitarian assistance, for example. So it has different functions. So how we created it, of course, as I said many times, I mean, we did a lot of consultations, we did a lot of testing. This consultation actually involved the local community. So we initially did it in the southern part of Africa, so Mozambique and in the South Africa, to be very specific. And then we saw that it was a success, and then we brought it to other contexts as well to see this cultural compatibility aspect too. And at the same time, we tried to work with the Red Cross and Red Crescent. I mean, we have Red Cross or a Red Crescent in every single country that we we provide assistance. So we try to work with our local partners as well to develop this particular app. Another example is this weapon contamination project that I just touched on, the work with the NEC. Actually, we work with Waseda University in Japan. So what we are trying to do is to use the drone and then take the photos from the sky. And then we gather the data, and then we send the data to Waseda University. They analyze it and by AI, machine learning. And then it is supposed to improve the predictability of landmines that are on the ground or in the ground. And so that's kind of like the collaboration that we are trying to seek. I mean, landmines is a very difficult area to collaborate, but we are really exploring how the technologies can help us solve the humanitarian huge challenges.
Yeah, I think one of the difficulties in any human endeavor is the coordination overhead. It's impossible to know what is going on in every place and every time, and therefore trying to scale any project beyond a few people, it just becomes really difficult. You can see this in practice in your daily life. Whenever you have an issue with computer software, or even just hardware for that matter, and you reach out to get help, one of the first things they'll ask you is like, did you modify this anyway? What were you doing? Is you using this in the proper way? Because in almost all cases, there's some kind of human error as opposed to a software error. Somebody received code from a vendor, and then they weren't really sure how it worked, but they said, oh, like actually there's this issue, and we'll just patch around it, and we don't need to report this up. And you can imagine as this scales to tens of thousands of people, that by the end of the day, when this actually gets shipped to the field and people are actually using this in real life, this may have become something that's far removed from the initial intended design when it was built in a country like Japan. And so trying to have better auditability of what is actually being run in the field, the actual state of the system in the field, is super important for not just the usability of the system, but also for stakeholders to come into agreement about the state of the project, right? If you have multiple companies together and they see data that maybe does not match their hypothesis, one of the first things they'll probably go to is not, maybe I was wrong about my hypothesis. The first thing they'll probably go to is like, well, did you guys change something? Did you change the code? Did you change the deployment? What did you guys do? Because in such a large pipeline, it's probably something shifted somewhere, and that's why the data is wrong. And so having this kind of verifiable computation where you can have this kind of traceability that the system that's being run at the end of the day is mathematically provably accurate and matches what was designed initially, can solve a lot of these issues, because then you can have a common ground with all your partners, not just from a development perspective, but also your partners on the ground, and make sure that we have some common understanding that the final state at the end of the day and the code that's being run, the results of these computation really do match what everybody signed off before the deployment, and there hasn't been anything that's changed in between. And so I think this kind of new ways to have guarantees on what is happening through computation can solve a lot of these coordination overheads and allow us to build systems that scale to the levels that are required for these kinds of large humanitarian efforts.
Great, that's excellent. If it's okay, I'm going to ask you maybe a last question, and then we're going to open to questions from the floor, as I see a very attentive public, so I'm sure people will have questions for you. Maybe let me add one more piece to this puzzle that we are somewhat putting together today. One of the most complicated aspect, of course, of thinking about new technologies in humanitarian context is the aspect of digital inequalities. And of course, it's problematic on two levels. So let me give the example, for instance, of large language models or machine learning in general. Digital inequalities means that there are entire population or groups of people that do not input these models and that do not access the result of this. And the problem, therefore, is double, right? The models, the algorithm are not trained on data coming from certain groups, and then those groups also don't have access to the outcome, or maybe they will at some point, but the outcome will not be so adapted because it didn't include them from the start. So you can take it from any side of the problem. Maybe we can start with you now, Sebastien. Tell us, how do you think through the problem of digital inequalities in your work?
Yeah, I think one of the problems that a lot of these systems have had when you're trying to actually deploy them to the field is the access to the technology to actually either run the software or verify the software, right? If you're deploying technology to an area that might not have easy access to the global internet, trying to give them a system that's is internet dependent is not really going to scale, right? And so there's a lot of really interesting technology that we're working on to try and solve these kinds of problems, which is basically having proofs of the computation that can be generated locally. Because with these things, you can have a proof of a computation generated locally on the device, and then we use this technology called recursive snarks, which is like a kind of zero-knowledge cryptography that allows you to combine proofs of computation together. So you can have people on the field generating local proofs of their computation, combining their proofs together with other people that are also on the ground, and once they get to an internet-connected area, they can combine the entire computation, the entire state that's been accumulated, and upload that to the internet once they have that connectivity, yet still have the verifiability of all the computation. So you have some cryptographic mathematical proof that the result of accumulating all the states was not tampered with at any step. And so I think this kind of technology to enable local first development, so development that's not a cloud-based solution, but local first, that's optimized for local devices, is something that this kind of zero-knowledge cryptography is bringing to the table, and it's a new way to enable these solutions to run in a way that the kind of cloud-first development kind of philosophy that's dominated the past few years has not enabled. And so that's kind of what we're really pushing for as a company. That's the main key area that we're investing our R&D effort into.
No, thank you very much for that question, Chiara. I mean, oftentimes I feel like these digital inequalities are really related to the availability of infrastructure as well. And I mean, as you know very well, that in the situation of armed conflict, I mean, infrastructure is the first thing to go. And so this digital inequality is really an important issue for an institution like ours, and also for MSF, I'm pretty sure. And so, but at the same time, we are not an institution that really thinks about digital inequality and try to provide solution to digital inequality either. And so what we can do the best is to really, when we plan and we try to take action, we always have somewhere in our mind this issue about digital inequality. And then when we plan, we try to incorporate that aspect to our planning, and that's probably the best what we can do. So for example, we are right now trying to create a responsible use of technology framework as an institution. So this will cover the entire institution, and I haven't read it yet, so I can't tell you how strict it is going to be, and I'm a little bit afraid. But in there, this notion of digital inequality or inequality of the use of technologies per se, I think is put into a lot of thinking process and the planning process. So that's what I can probably say about digital inequality.
Did you want to add anything, Sebastien? Okay. Is there anyone wanting to ask anything, any question? I guess there are microphones available. I've learned that we should always leave a moment because some people have very good questions, but are rarely the people who want to put their hand up first.
Yeah. I have a question about what is the, for the Red Cross representative, please, what is the role of the bottom-up grassroots initiatives in the Red Cross, and how do you assess what's worth looking into investing for the resources in?
Right, the bottom-up process. I think when I mentioned it in one of the questions, when we talk about humanitarian assistance these days, we talk about localization of aid. And that's probably exactly that. I mean, the bottom-up approach, and it's not the top-down from Geneva, somebody coming and then trying to provide assistance to people. I think it's a very important discussion that we all have to have in the humanitarian sector. And so the strengths of the Red Cross and Red Crescent movement is that we do localization already. I mean, we have, as I said, we have these local chapters, I mean, Red Cross and Red Crescent societies everywhere in the world. And so they do, I mean, for example, in Japan, we have the Japanese Red Cross Society. We work very, very closely with the JRCS. And they understand the context. I mean, the local Red Cross and Red Crescent societies, national societies, they understand the local context probably the best. And so we consult with them very closely when we try to do something in that particular context. So that's how we try to ensure sort of like what you call bottom-up approach of the humanitarian assistance.
There was a second brave hand in the same. Thank you.
Good afternoon, and thank you so much for the knowledge and the insight you've been sharing. So my name is An. I'm working at a company called Aman. So what we do is we provide solutions for SME companies with lack of access to insurance. Now, I encounter a very dilemma when actually rolling out the business. So when we first started out, our mission very lofty. We want to enable everyone to access to healthcare and insurance. Now, along the way, in the process of doing so, we're able to amass a lot of data. So we practically know everyone's health conditions. What is the pre-existing condition that they have? How much they spent last year, right? So with that data, we are able to underwrite even better than insurance company. Now, one of the challenges actually come. Insurance companies start approaching us, offering a fee in exchange for the better underwriting data so they can price the insurance policy next year better. So now it becomes an ethical question for us. Yeah, should we give or not to give? If we give, of course, the underwriting model will be a lot better, but it will jack up the premium so high that some of these SMEs can never afford it. And a lot of them have the high premium because they have a vulnerable employee population. So in that particular situation, what each of you actually think? What should we as a technology business do? We honor the spirit of innovation by providing the insight to business, in this case, insurance company, to make a better decisions. Or we chose social missions where we actually holding back the data and continue to actually use the consensus on the population, a bit inaccurate. Interested to actually learn your view on this. Thank you.
Thanks a lot. That's a very complex question to answer to, but is any of you wanting to give your opinion on that?
Yeah, I think one of the difficult situations you're also in is that some company might approach you and say, hey, I want to know about your information to be able to get a better understanding of this specific potential customer. But you might not be able to provide the information about that customer. You want to be able to provide a statement about their information. For example, they have a pre-existing condition, those kind of information, without necessarily revealing the rest of the information, the rest of their medical history. And so this is hard because, one, you don't want to reveal information, but two, the person who is your potential customer also wants some guarantee that you're not lying, right? That you do really have this data and that you're not just making up data. So these are two separate problems that can be solved to a certain extent with technology, with some of the technology we're building. So there's kind of two parts to your question. One is if from an ethical point of view, is this something that we want to do? And then there's a second part to the question, which is that if we do it, can we do it in a way that minimizes any potential harm, both to us, to our customers, as well as to our potential business partners? And so, although I can't provide you an answer on the first part, we can definitely do our best to help solve the second part, which is trying to be able to have a way to do computation on top of this data that you can prove that the data came from some kind of database, and that the customers of your service can prove that their health records really are stored as part of this information bank. So this kind of verifiable computation, the fact being able to prove that the data is computed correctly and comes from the true source information. These are kind of the stuff that technology can help with. For the first part, which is more that should we do this in the first place, that's a bit harder a question.
That is a very difficult question. I mean, should we do it in the first place is a difficult question, because in the course of working with the private sector, I mean, overall it's quite limited. I personally found that, you know, I mean, the way we think as a humanitarian is maybe sometimes it's different from how the private sector or the startup companies think. I mean, of course, the monetary issue always comes out. I mean, it's a priority, and I completely understand. I mean, the financial benefit is important for the private sector and also maybe the startup companies. And then for us as a humanitarian, that's probably not the most important, I mean, important factor. If it is, then we are facing problems. But we understand it, but at the same time, I think what I can say is that we really encourage everyone to put human at the center of everything. When you consider these new technologies, the ethical questions, you just try to put human beings at the center. And I mean, this is kind of going away from this health question that you raised. But one of the things we are very much concerned about these days as the ICRC is the growing use of AI in weapons. I mean, if you look at Gaza, I mean, if you look at Ukraine, I think it's pretty obvious the use of AI is happening right now. And then it's really the speed of development of these new weapons it is just really, really amazing. And so in that kind of situation, we totally face these ethical questions. I mean, these weapons are used in a battlefield, and we witness that every single day at the front line. And so there is always, with new technologies, the use of new technologies, there's always ethical questions and there's always ethical considerations. But I really encourage everybody, including the ministries, including the private sector, to put the humans at the center.
Yeah, I think related to that, oftentimes the trick people use in these kinds of dilemmas is to put the choice back to the user and have the end user at the end of the day decide what they opt into for how their data is used, and having it be clear to them what are the potential benefits and disadvantages of opting into this. And the kind of key thing that we're trying to enable is having the user being able to have this kind of self-sovereignty over their data. Not only by being able to know what's happening with their data, but also having the option to share that data with other companies if they think that there's a financial reason or other benefits for them to do so. So of course, putting this control back into the hands of the users is of course, from a technology perspective, a very difficult challenge. But I think this is what a lot of the technology is aiming to try and solve at the end of the day, because unless we kind of put this back into the hands of the users, there will always be another company like yours that will make a different decision, right? Even if at the end of the day you decide today, for ethical reasons, I will pick option A, there are other companies in similar position as you across the world who may choose B. right? And the best way we can try and avoid these dilemmas is to try and get rid of the dilemma in the first place by providing a separate option where instead of the companies making this decision in the first place, it's rather the end users that are able to make that decision themselves.
I think we have time for one last very short question. There's raised a hand there.
Thank you. I just have one quick question for the ICRC. Do you use technology in any way to try and predict or more quickly communicate when conflict or there's going to become a humanitarian issue in a region of the world?
Predict and communicate. Did I get that right?
Predict and
Predict.
speed up the communication so the rest of the world understands there's a difficulty in an
Right.
area.
No, thank you very much for that question. As an ICRC, I don't think we are using technologies to predict the conflicts, and I think that's one of the areas. This is my personal opinion, so it's not the ICRC. But I mean, through my works in different conflict areas, I find it that it's awfully difficult to predict. I mean, there are signs of conflicts, and you have to really pick that up and then try to really prepare yourselves for what is coming. But at the same time, I mean, Ukraine, Gaza, I mean, these are the two good examples of how unpredictable the situation can be. So I don't think we are using any technologies for predictions, but communication, yes. I shouldn't probably even call it new technologies anymore, but I mean, of course, the SNS and, of course, I mean, these things we do utilize, but at the same time, we have to be extremely careful because misinformation, disinformation, hate speech, it hits us all, including us, I mean, the humanitarian organizations, and we are extremely careful about the usage of, the new ways of communication.
Yeah, if I can maybe add to that as well. This is a common theme in relation to data privacy as well. So for example, there are often cases, even countries like Japan, where the Japanese government says, okay, well, we know there's like something going on. Wouldn't it be nice if we could take all that data, just run it through an AI and then try and get some predictions of the state of what's happening? The problem is that this often runs into privacy issues, right? In Japan, it's different ministries in charge of different things. And oftentimes, by design, these ministries cannot easily or readily share information between each other. Things are siloed. You need to go through an approval process to get access to the data. And so being able to just run everything through a system to get predictions is oftentimes hard to do by design. And so this question of, okay, well, if we can't do this easily, is there a way we can at least try and figure out if the different agency has information that could help us make this prediction? So you're trying to figure out who in the country like Japan, which is like, a massive country, which other ministry has information on this topic that might be relevant for me even making a prediction, which just knowing that by itself can help a lot with efficiency and accuracy. And so in this kind of case, you're looking at different ministries running their own kind of AIs or their own predictions, and having these kinds of networks of different agents being able to query each other and find whether or not they have information related to separate queries. And so this is something that we're looking into as well at our company. And there's a lot of other projects kind of getting into this space. But I think this is historically, although partially a technology issue, it's primarily a privacy issue, which is why we don't have these kinds of predictions as commonplace as you might think.
Just to add, I'm really glad that you really raised that issue because, these days, armed conflict, if it happens, then it lasts such a long, long time. I mean, the conflicts that are still taking place, they're all protracted, almost all protracted conflicts. And then if you look at the economy of things, it's so much better if we can actually predict the conflict and then prevent the conflicts from happening. I'm sorry for saying economically, but also, of course, in terms of human lives and human suffering, if we can predict. I mean, that's probably for the best. It's really hard to do, I mean, at the moment, but if the technology develops and it's possible, then I'm really all for it.
Cool. We have a call for help then for anyone who wants to work on that. I'm afraid we don't have time left for more questions, but I would really like to thank you both very much for participating and engaging in this dialogue, which I think is just at the beginning. So I'm sure it will keep on growing. And thank you very much for the excellent questions as well.
Thank you very, very much. Okay, so let's move on to the photo session. Thank you very much. Once again, please make a round of applause to Chiara, Sebastian, and Shoko. Thank you so much. ありがとうございました。